Okay. Good evening and welcome to tonight's program from the Newark Public Library, a talk with Leslie K. Barry, author of the new novel, Newark Minutemen. I'm Tom Ankner, director of the Charles F. Cummings New Jersey Information Center at the Main Library. During our program, we will be leaving observers and cameras and microphones off. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. Before we get started, I just wanted to encourage you all to fill out your census forms. Filling out the census is one small but very important thing everyone can do right now to help our city and our communities. If you haven't done so yet, please go to my2020census.gov and fill out the brief questionnaire. The information you provide affects funding for healthcare, transportation, your local schools, and many other needs. Remember, my2020census.gov. It is safe, secure, and confidential. And now I would like to welcome Leslie K. Barry, author of the novel Newark Minutemen. Leslie has been a screenwriter and executive producer who has worked for entertainment companies, including Turner Broadcasting. Leslie, welcome. Thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you, Tom. So I'll just jump in. And first of all, Tom, I want to thank you so much for having me.
Sure.
Talking at the Newark Library, it's like talking at an icon for me because this is obviously where my story is set and Newark is the heart of my story. So it's truly a privilege to be talking for the Newark Library. My book is, as you said, it's called Newark Minutemen, and it's based on a true story from the 1930s, the Depression era, so between the wars. The World War II had not started yet. And it's about a Jewish boxer who is working undercover for the mob and the FBI to rid our country at the time of the American Nazis. They were called the German-American Bund, that were taking over our country, and nobody either realized it or were doing anything about it. And during this journey of this Jewish boxer fighting against this enemy, he falls in love with the daughter of the German-American Nazi Bund. So you have this star-crossed love affair layered on top of this setting of the 1930s. So sort of where did the idea come from? So my mom, who is 95 and going strong now, she grew up, I think she was born in the 3rd Ward of Newark, and then they moved a ton of times, but landed on Hawthorne Street. She went to Hawthorne Elementary and then Nye Ave. So she grew up, she was born in 1925 and obviously grew up through some tumultuous times of depression and pandemics and wars. And so as we grew up, we heard all these stories. And of course, like most kids, we didn't really listen to any of them until at her 90th, just a few years back, my sisters and I, our goal was to get 90 people at her 90th. And we gathered all these old cousins and they started talking about my Uncle Harry, her older brother. She had 4 older brothers. And he was a prize fighting boxer. He won the Golden Glove, one of the Golden Gloves at Madison Square Garden. We knew all that story and there's a newspaper article. But then they started talking about how he used to come home and he was all beat up and their mom would yell at him. And she said, where were you, in her Yiddish speaking accent and language. And he said, oh, I was out beating up the Nazis. And I started listening to this story and the cousins were like, yeah, remember when Uncle Harry, your brother Harry would beat up the Nazis? I'm like, what are you talking about? Nazis in 1930 here in America? And they were like, yeah, he was part of this group called the Newark Minutemen. They were, so this was a real group that was put together by, so what happened was, all these Nazis were taking over our country. They were marching down 5th Avenue through Newark, through every city in America. And we couldn't do anything about it because of First Amendment rights. The government couldn't do anything about it. So back then in the 30s, who can they go to? Who's got some power? They went to the Jewish mafia. And they went to Meyer Lansky, who was the New York head of the mob. And they said, look, we'll pay you if you can go and thwart and break up some of these rallies that are going on, and we might need your help doing some other stuff too. And Meyer Lansky said, look, you don't need to pay me, just look that way. And they said, okay, fine. And so Meyer Lansky started getting these young boys together to disrupt protest at some of these events. And it got a little out of hand. So Meyer went over to his buddy in Newark, Longy's Willman, because Longy's Willman had a whole group of boxers that were well trained and listened to them and could be called on a moment's notice. And they had like a network, like it was like iPhone, but they didn't have iPhones, I guess. But so he went to Longy and he said, look, I need your help. And so Longy, with the help of Nat Arno, who became sort of the captain of this group of boys, created this group called the Newark Minutemen, who on a moment's notice would go out and show up at these huge Nazi-like, Nuremberg-like events and start, breaking them up and doing other things to find out information about what was really going on, because some of the people believed that this group was a total rogue group, and there were some people that believed they were really tied to Hitler. And they turned out they were tied to Hitler, and I can go through a little bit later how that was proven. So that's all sort of the true background. But so this American Nazi group, they were called the German American Bund. They had an American Hitler, and his name was Fritz Kuhn, and they called him Führer Fritz Kuhn. And he called our country the German colony, and he divided it up into 3. And he created all these cells of groups, thousands and thousands of members, and they would dress up like they were in Germany, and they would march. They would practice guns, and they had a group called the Stormtroopers, which were like the SS. And in addition, and he also had, it was like a corporation, and he had 6 companies under his corporation, and they were bringing in millions and millions of dollars. And then the other, one of the corporations they had under there was these Nazi youth camps, American Nazi youth camps, 3 of them in New Jersey. And the most famous one in terms of what came out with the FBI later on was one in Long Island called Camp Siegfried. And there were what came out later, there were some really interesting things going on there in terms of they were actually raping the girls with the goal of increasing the Aryan population in America. They were taking in spies that were coming in off the coast of Long Island, and all that's true. And so I took that whole story and researched it. I went through thousands of pages of FBI documents. I went to the Hoover Institute here at Stanford and found firsthand diaries of other people who had gone undercover, and I took some of the details of that. There's a scene where my hero is undercover and he's being recruited, and he's going through a ceremony to be like an SS guy, and I took a lot of the details from that. So, okay, so that's all the true background. And then what I did was just kind of like Titanic. Titanic was the background, and then over it is this star-crossed love affair where my Jewish boxer, Yale, falls in love with and meets and falls in love with Krista, who's the daughter of one of the leaders of the German American Bund. And as you can imagine, crossing into each other's worlds has a lot of tension and conflict. And it's a whole journey of, their relationship and the bad, the good. Are they going to make it together or not?
And Yale and Krista are based on real life people, right?
They're a combination of people. Yale is based on, a couple years earlier, there were two brothers, Jim and John Metcalf, who were from Chicago. They were Germans. They weren't Jewish. They were Germans. One worked for the FBI. One worked for a Chicago newspaper. And the editor of the newspaper was very creative, and he had these two guys go undercover for 6 months. And these are the diaries actually I read, and I met actually John's son. I talked to John's son about using them. And these guys went undercover for 6 months, and then there was a 12-day newspaper story that came out every day for 12 days. And so Yale is encompassed in John. He's really John and a couple of other people. And Krista is really this woman named Helen Vrurus, who was the woman who testified for the FBI in, I think it was 1941, that she was raped at the camps and other stuff that was going on in the camps. So they're a combination of people. And some of the timelines, while they're true stories, I've condensed some of the timelines. I've combined some of the protests and the rallies for the sake of creating a story, keeping to a plot line. Yeah.
So the Newark Minutemen have been written about before. There was a nonfiction book written by someone who's a good friend of the Newark Public Library, Warren Grover, who you mentioned in your acknowledgments. Now he doesn't talk about the FBI involvement though in his book. Is that part fictional, or is that something that really happened?
No, that really happened. Actually, it was the person that approached Meyer Lansky. He was a judge. His name was Judge Perlman. And, he also, what's his name? LaGuardia was, he was half Jewish, half Italian. And he and Perlman and the FBI were like, we have to do something. But they couldn't. They were stopped at every turn. So some of that's a little exaggerated. I have a scene where Hoover is in the office with Longy's Willman. I don't.
Yeah, I remember that. I noticed that, yeah.
I know Longy was in front of Hoover at one point, but I don't know if that went down. But one interesting thing I learned that I never appreciated was the role of the mafia during the 30s. And we know a lot of bad stuff went on, but because of the crash in 1929, when everybody lost their money, who still had money? The mafia, the Italian and the Jewish mafia. So in the 30s, they were the ones that gave all the jobs. They protected the neighborhoods. They helped rescue people from Europe. And my mom talks about how Longy was, everybody loved him in the neighborhood. I mean, maybe he had some competitive people other places, and certainly he maybe his methods everybody would appreciate, but it was the mob who gave the neighborhood jobs. They gave them heart. They felt them, made them feel safe. Again, I'm saying that, I know it wasn't always safe, but it was interesting the role the mob played back then, and how our government had to work with them, or found it useful to work with them. I know the governor, Longy put the mayor of Newark back then in office. What was his?
Meyer Ellenstein?
Yes. And then he was good friends with the governor.
He's a character in the book too.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
So let me see if I hit, so let's see. So yeah, so I think I hopefully I gave you a flavor of the book. So yes, you have this star-crossed love affair, and Yale, the hero, is recruited by Longy Zwillman to go undercover to with the goal of putting Fritz Kuhn in jail. And Fritz Kuhn, who was the American Hitler, you know, again, the government tried to stop him, arrest him, but because of certain freedoms, they couldn't. So the way they got him was through his taxes and fraud. And Yale is a big helper in that, in terms of going undercover to do that. And while he's doing this, Krista is at the camp, and he loves her and he wants to rescue her. Does she want to be rescued? That's another question. But so there's the whole story of the camps as well as Newark, New Jersey. So,
I just wanted to return to the question about the FBI, because it interests me that what kind of documentation do you have for that? Are there FBI? You mentioned you looked at FBI documents. Do you have actual FBI documents that say that they worked with the mob?
No, no way, no. And in fact, one of the reasons people say, why isn't this story, why didn't anybody hear this story? I think one of the reasons is because it was a secret. The one that is printed, though, that I've found printed, in fact, there was just an article reprint the other day that went around the internet about, because I have a friend named Perlman, I asked if he was related to him. So the Judge Perlman is a documented story where the Judge Perlman went to Meyer Lansky. And then the other is just weaving together the relationships and my knowledge of the other story where the two brothers, one was from the FBI, working with the newspaper to go undercover. So we do know the FBI was involved with trying to stop the Nazi Party from rising, and that activity that was coming into America. So I put those two pieces together.
Okay. So you include your family too, right? Your family, several members of your family are characters in the book. One is one of the major characters, Harry, one of the Newark Minutemen, was your uncle, right?
Yes, exactly. So that was my mom's older brother, and I do have a couple scenes in their home with her father and mother, and she had a much bigger family, but I stopped it at Harry. But yes, Harry was her real brother, and he was a real boxer who boxed at the YMHA down on High Street, I guess. And yeah, and I also bring in some of the other family members. We had her cousin, my mom's cousin Irving, was a barber, and he used to cut Longy's hair. And my mom's cousin, she was involved in some of the details of this book too. That was the daughter of Irving. She just passed away, but she told me these stories. They lived next to the candy store, where in the back back then when you heard candy store in Newark, first of all, they had more than candy. It was like a drugstore without the drugs. With, you know, you went in there for pencils and everything, but what you didn't know maybe was that in the back of the candy store, that's where the mob did the numbers, had their meetings, played cards. And so she would talk about, they lived right next door and they could see stuff going on. Who else in the family? I try to give a nod to a lot of people. There's a letter in there from my mom's cousin again. My mom had, her father had, I think, 9 brothers and sisters. Some of them never got to America. They perished in the Holocaust or over there. And then her mother had 3 sisters. So try to get everybody in there. And I named her her brother, who just passed away a couple years ago, Joe. He's Yale's father, Joseph. So yeah, I tried to really personalize it. And honestly, this story started out as I really wanted to do it for my mom. I was possessed with doing this for my mom. And it became much more afterwards. But so I was trying to weave all of her life. I spent hours and hours and hours talking to her about how they took out the trash and what the cabinets were like. And so the detail is like I'm trying to really put my shoes back there. But uh, where was I going with that? So yeah, so so anyway, originally I did it for my mom, and then it actually I became so sort of entranced with this whole thing about complacency and how people were so complacent and everybody was just looking the other way. And it was amazing because these German soldiers with swastika flags and American flags side by side, it's on the cover of my book, were marching down Fifth Avenue and every avenue in America, yet we were doing nothing. And the idea of complacency started becoming sort of I was driven to sort of send a message about not being complacent, and which is, somewhat what we see today happening as well. I mean, yeah. Hate will always be there, and I was became caught up in don't ignore it, and that became my message.
Yeah, well, we were officially neutral before we actually entered the war. So I guess there was an attempt to, and there was a large German-American population here. And it might have been one of the reasons that the government didn't feel free to interfere with some of what was going on. So yeah, I wanted to ask you about the parallels to today, though, because the sense, some of the language used and some of the scenes depicted, those big rally scenes, and I think you even used the expression "Make America Great" at one point in the book, which I think was one of Kuhn's expressions. So I mean, when I was reading it, I was thinking, well, yeah, I was wondering if it was deliberate, or the parallels to today deliberate in the book.
Not initially, and maybe this is a good time, I can show you this little clip of, there was an event, in fact, my nephew said to me, when my nephew was Ethan Tuttle was one of the first people to read the book for me. And he said, wow, he goes, you stole that line, "Make America Great," and you put it in your book. And I said, no, somebody else stole it from Fritz Kuhn. So I had this thing about making this as historically accurate as possible. And in fact, part of my problem in the earlier drafts was it was too much history. And somebody said to me, you have to make the history disappear. You have to make people, when they read this, not feel they're reading a history book. But the speeches, I have the copies of speeches that I took directly, or some of them I think are almost direct quotes from some of the speeches, and the sentiment is not made up. All of that is true. And I'd love to show a little clip here of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in 1939, and this is sort of where my story begins and ends. It's a flashback. On President's Day in Madison Square Garden, which was an icon. It's like the Newark Library for Newark. It's one of the icons back then. Fritz Kuhn and his German-American Bund filled the garden with 25,000 Bund members. And the whole idea was to call for, they called it Der Tag, the day when they would officially become a Nazi party and get a Nazi, American Nazi candidate for president. And that's where part two is Plot Against America. This is kind of what could have happened to segue into Plot Against America, which was 1940, the next year. And what happened was people, the Newark Minutemen, the Mafia, they tried to stop this event, but again, they couldn't. And Fritz Kuhn swore, he goes, I swear I won't have any swastikas, I won't say any anti-Semitic things. And of course he did when he got in there, but so they could not stop it from happening. It was interesting, Mayor LaGuardia at the time said to the people that were trying to stop it, look, I can't stop this, but what I'll do is I will put Jewish and Black police out front so that at least they can step aside, I guess. But so they ended up, the Mafia and the different groups from all different ethnic groups, Americans, Italians, they got 200,000 people to show up and protest. And that was the beginning of the end. And finally, people started opening their eyes and saying, whoa, who is this person? And in fact, just to give you the timing, to remind the history, it was 6 months later that Hitler invaded Poland. So we were marching forward with a Nazi party. All of us, finally, we opened our eyes 6 months early before the war actually started. So let me clip us in here to this. I'm not going to do the whole, I won't do the whole screen, but oops, that doesn't need to be there. Okay, is that good? Can everybody see that?
Yep, yeah, we can see it.
So, so this is the rally, this is real footage, 1939, President's Day.
February 20th, 1939. Just months before Hitler invades Poland and ignites the deadliest war in history, thousands of Nazis gather for a rally at an indoor arena. But this isn't Nuremberg or Berlin. This is Madison Square Garden in New York City.
You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press.
And the man speaking isn't a member of Adolf Hitler's inner circle. He's Fritz Julius Kuhn, a U.S. citizen and head of the German-American Bund, or Association.
Kuhn wanted a rally to celebrate George Washington's birthday. The first American fascist is what they called him. They signed a contract with Madison Square Garden. Said, okay, we agree. No swastikas, no anti-Semitic signs, none of that stuff. Of course, once the contracts were signed, those agreements went out the window.
This program was produced for the German-American Bund rally.
We love him for the enemies he has made. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fritz Kuhn.
Kuhn then went on to deliver a very, very predictable and very, very typical National Socialist stump speech about racism and the Jewish conspiracy and the communists and how everybody's an enemy and everybody has to be alike.
We, the German-American Bund, organized as American citizens with American ideals and determined to protest ourselves, our homes, our wives and children against the slimy conspirators and the parasite hands of Jewish communism in our schools, our universities, our very homes.
So I'll stop it there, but it's chilling if you watch the whole thing, and it's on my website if you'd like, newarkminutemen.com, if you'd like to see the whole thing, as well as some other very interesting pictures, and the most chilling to me actually were the ones at the camps, where the children, our German-American children, were indoctrinated, and they spoke German at the camps. They learned all the German books. They'd learned all the German ideologies. They wore the uniforms, the real uniforms that the kids in Nazi Germany were wearing. They learned to shoot. They learned, and the other things we've talked about as well.
And the camp is portrayed in your book. There's Krista, one of the main characters, and spends a lot of time at one of the camps. And several of the scenes take place in the camp in the book. Camp Siegfried on Long Island.
Camp Siegfried, yes.
Yeah.
The big one in New Jersey was Camp Nordland in Andover, New Jersey, which I think is maybe like 30 or 40 minutes from you all, or
Yeah, more like probably more like an hour. But it's and that's also in the book, Camp Nordland as
that's
well.
also in the book. Yeah, the ones that are also in New Jersey, I don't know. Let's see, I'm not sure exactly where these towns are, but Camp Willie and Mock was in Griggstown, Franklin Town, the Somerset.
Oh, okay, I know where that is. Yeah.
And then, of course, Camp Nordland, and Camp Bergwald was in Federal Hill in Bloomingdale in Passaic.
Oh, it's actually very close to where I grew up. That's funny.
Yeah.
There was a camp up there. That's interesting.
Yeah. And there still remains. You can go and still see the remains of these camps.
Ah, okay. And they were broken up, I guess, after the war started.
Yeah, after, when the war started, so what happened was 6 months after the President's Day, Fritz Kuhn was actually, he went to jail. So I won't give it away how he went to jail, but so he went to jail and then somebody else took over. So then Germany has attacked Poland. America is still hedging. So I think finally the FBI finally broke these camps up in like 1941. And I was able to find footage of, and I think it's available now. It only, see, part of the thing was that some of these FBI documents were sealed until 2010. So nobody really knew the details of these stories until, it's kind of recently. But I was able to find in certain archives, and I think you can find it pretty much on the internet now, but videos that were confiscated, I mean, real true proof of what was going on in these camps. The most interesting resource I found as I was doing some of this research, other than I found 12 boxes of these diaries that this undercover John Metcalf had kept. That was super interesting. But the other interesting piece was a book that is out of print now. It was written in 1970, and it was written by a social studies teacher who heard about these camps and became so interested in them that he quit his job and went around the country interviewing the grown-up kids that had gone to these camps. And so I have all these interviews and anecdotal information. And the other thing that he proved was the money trail that through the highest levels of our financial institutions, the president of Chase Bank and a couple of other presidents was funneling money from German Americans here back into Germany, millions. Like back then, I think it was 25 million was proven at least, which was, I don't know what the value is today, but it was a lot. And so they proved that following the money trail, that there was a tie to the German Reich.
Okay. Now, we talked about your family as characters in the book, but there are also a number of real-life figures who are characters in the book. Both Longies Woolman and Fritz Kuhn are major characters in the book, but there are other people who make cameo appearances. Fiorello LaGuardia and J. Edgar Hoover and Meyer Lansky, I think, is in one scene.
Meyer Lansky,
Yeah. So how do you incorporate these, these famous people into this fictional narrative? How do you do that?
Well, the way my book is written is it's four characters speaking in first person. So, for instance, I have Yale. He's telling a story. So they're narrators. So you have four narrators. And my four narrators are Yale and Krista, the hero and the heroine. and then Longy and Fritz Kuhn. And by writing first person, it was a really interesting experience. And I did it because I'm like, okay, there are good guys here and there are bad guys here, but who is really the bad guy? I mean, the mafia, the godfather of the mafia is a bad guy, right? Or is he a good guy? To some people, Fritz Kuhn was a good guy. To some people, was a bad guy. And by doing it in first person and looking through their eyes, I was able to really get inside their perspective of what was going on. And so it was through their eyes that they were seeing the other characters. And it was a really helpful device to be able to integrate all the characters together.
Now, this project started out as a screenplay, right?
It did, yes, yes. I wrote a screenplay in, I don't know, record time. People told me I could never write it that fast and get it sold that fast, but I did. And I think it was so well received because of the relevance of some of the stuff that's going on today. But it was my first screenplay, and probably, thank goodness I was a little bit naive, because I made some calls that people were like, you really called him? And I'm like, well, you know, was I not supposed to? But we got to the highest levels and a lot of interest. And I ended up selling it to a production company called Fulwell 73. And they're a British production company. They're 4 Orthodox Jewish guys. And their 5th partner is James Corden, who is, you know, Carpool Karaoke and the Late Night. And they have their Hollywood office in CBS. And he's the partner there. And it's moving along. Actually, I had a meeting, big meeting today. And, you know, with all of the virus stuff, people are holding on the brakes a little bit, but we're at a stage where we have 2 incredible screenwriters that have done really high level screenwriting, because they'll, you know, somebody else will take my idea and rewrite it, which is one of the reasons I wrote the book, to actually have that idea all together. But so we're doing some presentations in this week, and hopefully the virus won't stop us forever. So we're moving forward, but very excited about that. And I keep telling them, my mom's 95. We gotta get this up on the screen. So probably not next year, but hopefully the following.
So why did you decide to turn it into a novel?
Honestly, well, 2 reasons. One, every single day, my mom would say, so what's happening with the movie? What's happening with the movie? What's happening with it? So she didn't realize that movies take 2-3 years. So I said, okay, I need to think about writing the book here. And the second reason was because when you sell a story to Hollywood, it is changed so much. And because this was a family story and a historical fiction, I wanted to preserve it. And I had kept the rights to the book. So I decided, and I had the plot. It was a little more challenging than I thought, making it, because usually you do it the other way around. I had the plot well carved out and the specific characters, but in a novel, you need a lot of thinking, what people are thinking about, and it's a different approach. So it was a little more challenging than I thought, but I got some great help and ended up selling it to publisher Morgan James, who they're a smaller publishing house, but they were willing to, a lot of publishing houses want the movie rights too. And because I'd already sold the movie rights, it was a little tricky, but I was able to work that out. And our original release date was always in the fall, and December 1st is the paperback. It's still the paperback, but when all the shelter-ins started, they called me as well as some other authors and said, look, would you like to go ahead and release the ebook? And I said, sure, not knowing what I was really saying because I wasn't really prepared to do that. But I did. And then I said, this would be so overwhelming to really, I had 3 weeks to really launch this. And so what I did was I said, I'm going to focus. And I focused on, sort of friends and family and then the Newark area because I felt if I could get people in Newark to love it, hopefully they'll tell the world. And so I've done a couple other talks at the JCC Middlesex and Congregation Bethel and you guys in a book club. And we'll see if
And then the ebook is now on sale for $1.99 until next week.
It is. My publisher, I told them, I said, look, it's so hard for people to get the paperback right now with everything. And they said, well, why don't we do a promotional special for this Newark Library talk? And we specifically timed it around. So yeah, for about 10 days, it's $1.99. You can go on any site, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of them. I think it's on like 1,000 sites. And yeah, get it for $1.99. Or if you really want the paperback, I told Tom, let him know and we'll figure something out. And there are some books locally there that we can get to you because I know some people would rather do that, or I can sign them and send them or whatever you'd like.
Okay. So you mentioned Philip Roth's The Plot Against America a little while ago. Was that one of our observers here is asking if that was an influence on your book?
Well, directly it wasn't, but then, because I read that book years ago, and then when I went back and looked at it, I mean, I have to say it probably was. I love that book. I love it. I think it's a great story. And, my mom was 15 years old going to Weequahic High in 1940. So I would say indirectly and maybe coincidentally, but maybe I wouldn't have been so sensitive to this story if I hadn't read it. And it's amazing to have written this and now look back at his book. And I just watched this TV series, which you all may have as well, because he saw this going on and he turned it into a what if scenario, but he felt it. And my mom said she didn't really feel the fear directly that he did. But yeah, no, that truly could have been the scenario. And so the answer is probably yes, but I didn't even realize it.
Okay. So there's another world that you kind of talk about in this book that a lot of people don't know much about, the world of Jewish boxing. You mentioned there's a bit in your book in the introductory material of your book where you say that in the early 20th century, boxing was a huge sport in this country and it was dominated by Jewish boxers. I think it's really something that would surprise a lot of people. Did it surprise you when you first began looking into this?
Well, I mean, it didn't because because my uncle was a boxer, so I knew why he was a boxer. And we would always say, why was Uncle Harry a boxer? I mean, he was a big guy, but Jewish boys did not go to college in the 30s. They could not get a job, especially kids of immigrants. In the 40s, they started. But it is interesting. I think it starts in the 20s. The 20s and the 30s, there were more Jewish champion boxers than any other ethnic group. And I think that was part of the reason. I've read that some of these guys that came to America, the things they went through running from Russia, and they were warriors. They were real warriors. I know Jews became more the intellects, I guess, but that stereotype. But during the 20s and the 30s, they were tough and they came from tough people. And it's funny, one of Max Baer was one of the huge, big champions. And it's interesting because he's the father. I don't know if any of you all remember.
Jethro, right?
Pardon me?
Jethro?
Jethro.
He's Jethro's father?
That's right. Jethro from the Beverly Hillbillies.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's a great question. And And all the Jewish boxers wore the Jewish star on their boxing shorts as a statement. And I have this quote at the beginning. I just thought it was an interesting tie, and I weave it into the book. But there's a story in the Bible about King David where he has 37 warriors, and they were the most incredible warriors ever, ever, ever. And there's a part in the book where Longhi's talking, and they're talking about the boxers and how they're, you know, a reminiscent of the times of King David.
Okay. You also mentioned in your, I think it was in your acknowledgments, you mentioned that you learned how to box or when you were working on the book. How did that go?
Well,
Have you stuck with it?
I had a great coach. He was very good. And actually, I have 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. And what's funny is my 2 girls learned with me. My boys wouldn't learn with me. And talk about a great workout. But it was a great learning experience about being in that environment and how supportive everyone is, even though they're beating each other up. But yeah, he was an old timer too. He was a real old timer that would tell stories and was very patient. And yeah, taught my 2 daughters and I how to box, and picked up some of the lingo and some of the technical description in the book. So yeah, that's real stuff.
Have you stuck with that? Have you done any more? Have you just as a workout routine or something?
You know, sadly, he just passed away a couple months ago, and so I don't even know what's going on over there. And with the virus, I don't even know if boxing is allowed. But I did for a while. It's a super workout. It's great, and you don't realize the hours going by as fast as it is.
Well, so if anybody has any questions, please type them into the chat box. And while we have Leslie here, she'll maybe answer them. I don't see any other questions here. So, but oh, somebody did. Somebody Googled FBI and German American Bund and found his site vault.fbi.gov, which had a lot of information, a lot of documentation there. I included the website for your website, newarkminutemen.com, so people can go there if they want to know more about the book. Thank you, Leslie, for sitting down with me tonight. This has been fun. And thank you to everyone in the room tonight for taking part. For those of you interested in reading Newark Minutemen by Leslie K. Barry, the publisher, as we said before, is running a $1.99 special on the ebook. Check your favorite online bookseller for more. And we've talked about maybe if people can get in touch with me, we can maybe talk about getting them copies of the paperback. Oh, somebody is asking about the Bagel Bakers Union participating in this. Did you hear anything about that in your research?
The Baker Union?
Yeah, somebody's asking a question about that. I don't know anything about that, so I was wondering if you did.
Do you mean Cohen's Bakery, maybe? Is that?
I don't know. Somebody, Golden, is asking, does anyone know about the Bagel Bakers Union participating in this? So maybe were they also a part of the Minutemen?
I don't know. Good question. I'd love them to participate if they would like to. There is a scene, Cohen's Knishes, which was on Hawthorne Street, was a famous place, and that's a big setting in the story. But I don't think that's for the question. But I'm going to look that up. That's interesting.
Yeah. So you do include a lot of. Oh, somebody else is asking. Have you come across information about Teamsters' involvement in the Minutemen? Anything about that?
No, I think that was a little bit later. I think that they more formed in the 40s and the 50s. I may be mistaken, but no, that's a good question. That's a good question.
Okay. Well, I guess we're going to wrap this up now. And so and for anyone interested in other online programs from the Newark Public Library, check the library's calendar at npl.org/calendar. Good night, everyone. Be safe.
Night. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.